to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today's story is called The Selfish Giant, an adaptation of an Oscar Wilde classic written for you by Daniel Hinds. Thanks! Enjoy the episode! The Selfish Giant. Once upon a time, there was a selfish giant. He lived in a great castle by the river, all soaring spires and glaring gargoyles. As everyone back then knew, an angry giant made for a very bad neighbor, so the people from all around would bring him food and treasures to keep him happy. The giant liked that, and he had priceless piles of gold and silver and gems strewn about his halls. Fine art hung on every wall, and rare weapons gleamed on display in his armory. For all that, though, his most favorite treasure was his garden. The giant's garden was a beautiful patch of green, studded with the bright colors of fruits and flowers like an emerald opal, shining precious in the sun. Every morning, the giant would sit at his colossal table with a barrel of coffee and look out the window. He would admire the sprawling acres of flowers and trees and shrubs and all the rest that ran beside his castle, and he would smile a big, craggy smile. All was well for the giant, until one year he decided to visit his friend, the ogre. It was a long journey, over the mountain and through the caves, and it was nearly a year later that the giant finally returned to his castle. When he arrived back home that winter, he was shocked to find his garden overrun with children. The little brats were climbing up the trees and swinging from their branches. They were darting between bushes, having snowball fights. They were making snowmen with acorn eyes that smiled above the shrubs. They were everywhere, like an army of ants at a picnic. They were enjoying his garden. The giant couldn't stand it. "Get out!" he bellowed, his soaring shout shaking the snow from the trees. "No kids in my garden!" Some of the kids ran when they saw him, but others kept playing. Under their thick winter hats all frosted with snow, they couldn't hear a thing. Still shouting, the giant went inside to his armory and hefted his favorite mace, which was a gnarled log with an iron ball lashed to one end. He went back outside and slammed it into the ground. The earth shook and the snow splashed, and this time everyone heard. "Keep out! Keep out! No children allowed! It's a garden for looking, not playing around! Don't swim in my fountains! Don't climb in my trees! If I see you again, then I'll smash you to cheese!" The kids ran screaming from the grounds, and the giant chased them until they were all far, far away from his sprawling garden. The giant felt a cool breeze blow through, as if nature itself was upset. But what did nature know? "Kids! Pests!" he snarled, returning back to his castle. "Think they can play in my garden, do they?" The next day, the giant went out with a bale of bricks and built a wall. It was as tall as he was, thick and strong, and ran for acres and acres. The children were sad when they saw it, because they knew they had lost their favorite place to play. Sure, there were other trees and such by the river, but none as lush and sprawling and fun as the giant's private garden. The rest of the winter, the giant enjoyed his garden in peace. He'd get his barrel of coffee and sit by his window and watch the snow drift in lazy loops around the bare trees and the pine needles and the bushes, bustling with winter berries. That year, spring sprung swiftly. The snow melted away to reveal lush green grass and tweeting birds and trees shaking awake their new leaves. Bushes grew heavy with strawberries, and cute critters crawled bold and blinking from their winter nests. Everyone agreed it was the most beautiful spring they could remember. Everyone but the giant. His garden remained bare and cold, A thick layer of dirty snow laid like a ragged blanket over every acre. There was no green to be seen. No animals emerged chittering and bright, and even the birds stayed away, so there were no tweeting songs in the morning. Everywhere else along the river was in full bloom, but the giant's garden remained cold and dead.
"What is going on?"
he demanded, hefting his huge mace again. He looked for something to smash, but even a giant can't smash the seasons. Instead, he went out with his big shovel-sized hands and cleared off all the snow. Underneath, the earth was frosty brown and bare, crumbling and dry as ashes. If anything, it looked worse than before. The giant roared in frustration and went back into his castle, slamming the door behind him so hard it cracked down the middle. Later, he heard little scratchings at the wall and went out to see kids trying to climb into his garden. He picked up his giant mace and stomped after them, chasing them off.
"And stay out, you kids!"
he hollered. The kids ran screaming off into the distance. The weeks rolled by, and the giant still took his barrel of coffee by the window, watching the world outside his walls turn green, even as his own garden refused to grow so much as a blade of grass.
"Oh, just a late start,"
he said to himself.
"Come summer, it will all be back to normal."
Summer came, and it too was a wonder. The trees nearby were tall and green, the berry bushes groaning with fresh fruit. The birds were singing, and the summer breeze was warm and inviting. Everywhere but the giant's garden. Within his walls, it was nothing but dead trees and dry bushes, pale earth and silence but for the low, mournful wind.
"This is terrible!"
The giant raged in his castle. He smashed his barrel and let the coffee run down the castle walls. He threw his piles of gold and silver and tore the paintings from the walls. His garden! His precious garden refused to grow. Not a leaf, not a berry, not a single blade of grass.
"I've been cursed! It's a witch, or a warlock, or some kind of wizardry! Ah!"
The giant went to bed that night in the ruins of his castle, still grumbling even as he fell asleep. The next morning, he woke up and went to his window, glaring angrily out at the dry and brittle remains of his garden. He was about to go into a rage again, and then he saw something that made his giant heart soar. In the far corner of the garden, nestled against the wall, was a single splash of green.
"My garden!"
he roared in glee.
"A tree! It's coming back!"
He ran outside and saw that not only was the tree green, the flowers around it were starting to bloom. The giant started to celebrate, but then he spotted it. A kid in his tree. He stormed back into his castle, bellowing and crashing every step. A kid dared to climb the wall and sneak into his garden and into his tree, which was green. The giant stopped for a moment, realization washing over his craggy face. A garden all walled away, a garden without laughter and joy. Well, it wasn't much of a garden at all. It was a prison for tree and berry and bush, and he had been their warden. Well, no more. A minute later, he stormed back into the garden, his colossal mace in his colossal hands. With a thunderous, ear-splitting howl, he swung the mace with all his might. The kid in the branches screamed, but the mace didn't hit her or the tree. Instead, the mace hit the towering brick wall. It smashed a hole clean through, and then the giant swung again and again, smashing his wall to pieces. Kids looked on from a distance, a mixture of curiosity and fear playing across their faces as the wall fell. The giant looked at them, huffing and puffing, and then called out,
Come in, all children around. It's a garden for playing and living out loud. Swim in my fountains and climb in my trees. Swing in the branches and sing with the breeze. A garden is better with walls open wide. A garden is better with people inside.
With a cheer, the kids flooded back into the garden. They swung from the branches and the leaves bloomed. They wrestled among the bushes and the berries grew bright and juicy. They played tag all through the fields and the grass came in lush and green, and the flowers bloomed bright as jewels in the sun. And the giant went back inside to drink his coffee by the window. He admired his garden, and from that day on, the kids were welcome to come and play whenever they wanted. The end. Thanks for listening.